Hello, everyone. My name is Araceli Hernandez, and I just want to thank you and welcome you to the Nebraska History Museum, and thank you for attending this month's Lunchbox lecture. This history lecture series takes place on the third Tuesday of every month in the Old Father Auditorium here in Lincoln, Nebraska. Before we begin, I would like to thank the sponsor of this program, the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation. Their support allows us to put on these free monthly programs, as well as record and broadcast them across the state and online. A special thank you as well to LNKTV, a service of the City of Lincoln, for producing these programs. And a thank you, as always, to our members. If you are not already a member of the Nebraska State Historical Society, I encourage you to join. The support of our members allows us to put on programs like this for Nebraskans across the state. If you would like to watch previous Lunchbox lectures or check out the Nebraska History Podcast, you can find us on YouTube at NE Historical. You can also learn more about our museum, our programs, and all of the services provided by the Nebraska State Historical Society online at history.nebraska.gov. But on today's program, as many of you may know, September is Nebraska Archaeology Month. So throughout this month, we have been highlighting Nebraska's archaeological history and celebrating our dedicated archaeology team. Today, we are pleased to welcome a member of the NSHS archaeology team, Nolan Johnson. A little bit more about Nolan. Nolan graduated from the University of South Dakota in 2004 with a BS in history and anthropology. He went on to receive a master's degree in anthropology from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in 2006. And Nolan has been a part of the Historical Society in various roles since 2007 and has worked as an archaeologist as part of the Highway Archaeology Program since 2012. His primary responsibility involve working with the Nebraska State Department of Transportation on projects in the northeastern part of the state. His other interests include historical archaeology, cultural changes in Nebraska, and public archaeology. Nolan is also the president of the Nebraska Association of Professional Archaeologists. So please join me in welcoming Nolan Johnson, who will be presenting the archaeology of Courthouse and Jail Rocks, 12,000 years in the making.
Thank you for that kind introduction. As Araceli pointed out, I have a lot of slides, so we're going to jump right in. So first, a little legal disclaimer. We're going to talk about an archaeological site on state land, and it is illegal to take archaeological materials from state property. It's a Class 3 misdemeanor, so don't do it. Also, if you ever do find archaeological materials, call us. Don't collect them yourself. Let the professionals handle it. So that's just a little bit of legal business to handle. And then a picture. This is an excavation we did at Courthouse and Jail Rock back in 2019. It was great Nebraska weather. You can see everyone is bundled up, right? And the first day it was 40 degrees with 40-mile-an-hour winds. The very next day it was 90 with the 40-mile-an-hour winds. It's great, real great weather, always. So Courthouse and Jail Rock are listed on the National Register of Historic Places and have been since 1973. It was a very early nomination. And in those days, the nominations are kind of written on hope. There's not a whole lot of research that goes into them. But some things they call out in that nomination are that there's an archaeological site they knew that was at Courthouse and Jail Rock. There's historic trails from like the Oregon Trail and the Sydney to Deadwood Trail. There's that are trail ruts that are around there. There's a Pony Express station in the area. There's petroglyphs on Courthouse Rock. And then they talk about, in the nomination, they talk about this Pawnee legend. And we'll learn more about that, but it's real sketchy stuff. So it's not the best research as far as that goes. But now, the first thing I would tell you about archaeologists is we don't study fossils, right? We don't do dinosaurs. We do stuff about people. And we're not geologists. We don't study rocks. But for this, the first thing we're going to talk about are rocks. So just a little bit so we understand the geography of what makes Jail and Courthouse Rock the way they are is that you have to go back 40 million years ago when the sediments that make up those rocks are being laid down. And they're laid down in such a way that there is a very harder rock on top. And then under that hard rock, there are layers of volcanic ash and sand and clay and windblown sediments that kind of get cemented together. And after that all happens, over time, the North Platte River, which is maybe 4 or 5 miles away from Courthouse Rock, and Pumpkin Creek, which is right next door, carve down the landscape and kind of leave a ridge in between. Chimney Rock is also part of that same geologic formation. And Courthouse and Jail Rock are about the farthest east extension of this kind of ridge that runs all the way to like Scottsbluff National Monument, is also part of that same kind of divide between Pumpkin Creek and the North Platte River. And so here's a couple pictures. You can see, you can see the banding, right? These layers. This is Jail Rock right here. It's really easy to see the different layers of rock. And here's a close-up of some of, I wrote it down. You've got the basically clay, the hardened clay, and then these silt stones, which is essentially mud that's been hardened into really soft kind of rock. And then up here, you can see individual little, basically flood deposits, little deposits of soil that turn into rock over time. So, but on top, there's a very hard layer, and that's what keeps these rocks intact for us, for us to talk about. So, all right, so we're done talking about rocks, right? So now we're going to talk about people, right? And so Courthouse and Jailhouse Rock have been around pretty much probably how they look for a long, long time. And we had known for a long time that there was an archaeological deposit there from some folks that's maybe 400 or 500 years old. So not super old in the grand scheme of things. And it happens that in just last year, we were doing some work to test that archaeological site, and we found a Clovis point, part of a Clovis point, which is really the oldest well-documented archaeological culture in Nebraska. We're talking 11, 12, 13,000 years ago. So this was a big deal. In the archaeological world, it's a really big deal. And we found it, because it's such a big deal, it gets its own point, right? It gets right there. We found it right there, right at the base of the rock. And this is what it looks like. Oops, sorry, my fault. You can see there's the flute, right? Clovis points have these really distinctive flutes that go up each side. This one didn't quite work, so it only made it this far. Obviously, this is just the base of that point. But we know it's the Clovis point by how it's flaked, right? By how these pieces are knocked off and this really distinctive flute and this base. And people smarter than me, Dr. Phil, he's over here, told me about it. That if the people who study flake tools can look at how that spear point broke, then you can really tell that it hit something hard and kind of snapped off. And so it snapped off where it was hafted, right, where it was held to the spear shaft. And that's a really common way these Clovis points get broken. And what we think happens is that once those points are broken, they're pretty much useless, so the Native Americans would just dispose of them. They're just throwing that away. And that spear shaft, that wooden spear shaft, is much more important than the stone. You got to think about Nebraska 13,000 years ago, windswept prairie, right? There's not a whole lot of trees. And so a nice 6-foot long spear is a much more important than, a busted rock, a busted point. And so this scale, just so you know, that's 1 centimeter right there. So this thing is, an inch or so each way. And again, it's just a base. So it would have been maybe twice as tall, probably 3 times as tall before it was broken. And here's a couple pictures of some other Clovis points from Nebraska, just for some context. This is a crystal one made out of a quartz crystal that was found in southeast Nebraska. It's complete, and it's really neat because it's looks like glass. This one is from Hooker County. That's been turned into a scraper, like the point broke, and then they repurposed it. But again, you can see this concave base, right? And these big fluted flakes that come up this way. So that's a Clovis point, what a Clovis point is. And now in Nebraska, people have done some research on Clovis points in Nebraska. My coworker, Brian, presented a poster on it a year ago. And so I shamelessly took this graphic from him. So these circles are where the researchers have talked to people who have found Clovis points, right? A guy, a farmer, or a rancher found a Clovis point and told an archaeologist about it. These blue ones are where archaeologists have found a Clovis point and we know where it came from. So those are a little bit more firmer. We know a little bit more about those. The red one, that's Morrow County. That's where we found our Clovis point. And these yellow guys are where people have found caches of Clovis tools. A cache is like they buried some stones to come back and find them later. And now our Clovis point is pretty exciting because it's the first one in the state that came from an underground context that was found by an archaeologist. So the other Clovis points in blue were all surface finds, surfaces of tilled up fields. So you can't really say exactly where it came from. But the one we found, we know, that's never been, Courthouse Rock hasn't been farmed, right? You're not farming up against Courthouse Rock. So it is in place where we found it, which is really exciting because it's been there, for 12,000 years or so. So that's pretty cool. And that's the earliest archaeological evidence from jail and Courthouse Rock, dating back 12,000 years. But we're not done, right? We're not done. We got a whole hour to talk about archaeology. And so here is just kind of how that would fit in on a full Clovis point. This drawing is to scale, and you can kind of see how it's all put together. And here's another one, just another Clovis point from Nebraska. There are inches for you, so a couple inches long. These aren't really huge tools. Sometimes they're resharpened, and maybe they started out bigger, but they're not a giant spear point by any means. And here's some. These are reproductions, right? But you can see how we think they're hafted, and you can see there's the wooden foreshaft kind of hooks into that flute, and then it's kind of these ones are probably pine tar glued on and then wrapped with sinew to hold them in place. And ours broke right here, right when it hits something, the part that's not supported by the haft, it snaps right there. And that's a very common way you find these broken Clovis points, because they're busted in use. And so that's probably more or less what it looked like when it was being used to go hunting. So that's Clovis points. Now we got to skip ahead, maybe 8,000 years, and then we get to our next busted point, right? This guy, we found this. This is that part we found, and it doesn't look like a whole lot, but we thought about it. We did the research. We did our job real well because we're good at it, right? And so this is the base. This is the base of what we would call a Mallory point. Mallory points have this big curvy basal notch on the bottom. This is the bottom. You can see right there is the very start of a side notch. And I drew in, with the help of another fella, what the part that's missing, the other part of the base, would look like. And so Mallory points are from kind of what we would call the Middle Archaic times. We're talking maybe 4,800 to 2,800 years ago. And the difference, these are from atlatl darts. And atlatl is a throwing stick, and they're throwing big 6-foot long wooden darts with points like this on the end of it. So it's a different hunting technology. These are different people. The Clovis people, we think, are really big game hunters. You find those points associated with mammoth and extinct bison species, ground sloths, horses, camels, really that megafauna you think about from the Ice Age, right? Now, these folks who are using these Mallory points, they're hunting modern bison, lots of deer, lots of smaller animals. They're eating more plants. We find roasting pits and grinding tools, a more diverse lifestyle, but still very, very mobile, right? And that mobility is going to come back. We're going to talk about that, about why we're finding all this stuff right at Courthouse Rock. But Mallory points are part of kind of a larger archaeological complex called the McKean complex, which again is a bunch of related artifacts, related archaeology for these folks hunting with these dart points. And here is a a picture of a Mallory point. You see that basal notch and the side notches, and they're kind of short and kind of chubby. They're kind of funny looking little guys. But these ones are from Signal Butte, and we'll come back to Signal Butte. But as far as Nebraska goes, there are we have 37 documented McKean sites in Nebraska, so not a whole lot. Nebraska in total, we're pushing about 12,000 documented archaeological sites, so a really small fraction are these McKean sites, which Mallory points are part of. And here's another picture. This one is from, the way you send it. That one's from Wyoming, a nice complete one. And here's another busted one from Sioux County. And again, they're probably breaking right there because that's where they're hafted, right? They're breaking where they're not supported anymore. Both that Mallory point that we found and the Clovis base were both made of a chalcedony that comes from northwest Nebraska and southwest South Dakota. White River Group chalcedony is what it's called. Now, about the bluffs, right? So Courthouse Rock is a big, high rock that you can see from a lot of places. There are a couple other big buttes and bluffs in Nebraska. Some of the more famous ones are, this one is Signal Butte, right there in whatever county that is. I forgot that right there, and Barn Butte in Gosper, which is right there. And so these are big buttes, kind of isolated flat top little mesas, or buttes we call them here, where there is lots of archaeology on top of these flat places. And there's lots of bison bone there. And there's also lots of bison bone at Courthouse and Jail Rock. And so what's interesting to think about is, why are people hunting bison and then taking it up there, up to these high spots to butcher it, right? Why are they living up there where there's no water? You're kind of isolated in these, you're just up high, and you're not really near anything else. Now, I think that people are coming back to these places over and over again because they're easy to find. You could come back to these big, tall buttes and Courthouse and Jail Rock every year or every few years over time because it's a place that's recognizable on the landscape that you can meet up with these you got to think there's lots of different bands of people moving around the landscape. And when you want to have maybe a communal bison hunt, to meet up at these big geologic landforms that you can tell everyone to come back to next time, and you can get there. And so these are LiDAR maps of these two buttes. And again, you can see the flat, they're just kind of out there, not really connected to anything else. And this next one, here's there's Courthouse Rock and there's Jail Rock. And again, you can see how, the prairie is kind of all around. That's Pumpkin Creek right down there. It's dry now, but that would have had water, when people were living here. The Clovis Point came from right about here, and so did the Mallory Point right down there. But you can see how these are visible from a long, long way, and they could be used to draw people back, right? It's kind of an anchor on the landscape that people are able to get back to. And so here's just a fun picture I took. I'm not a very good photographer, but I really like this one. I call it Screens at Rest. So when I have my own art exhibit, that's what this one is called. But anyway, you can just kind of see how how that excavation is working. And we're putting all the dirt we dig through these little screens that's got 1/4-inch mesh on it. So we're recovering a lot of artifacts, right? And so we had our Clovis Point and we had our Mallory Point, and that's it for those two cultures, right? So it's pretty scant evidence. Now, there is a very extensive archaeological site that relates to what we would call the Dismal River people. Go ahead. And the Dismal River folks are ancestral to the Apache groups of folks who live in the Southwest. More correctly, the Dene people is what I think they prefer we would use. And the Dene is a language group of a lot of related people who started in the Canadian subarctic and begin to migrate down the front slope of the Rocky Mountains, stopping in Nebraska and Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, about 1500 to 1700 AD, 1750, give or take, and eventually, make their way into the Southwest. So think about Apache, Navajo. This language is still spoken in Canada and parts of the Pacific Northwest. And so while these folks were in Nebraska, we refer to it as the Dismal River culture. And so we knew that's what we knew was at the site when we started to do our work there in 2019. And so again, the site was recorded in 1962, so archaeologists have known about it for a long time. It's on National Register. People collected artifacts, but in 2019, the volunteer dig we had, the Historical Society did, was the first time people had ever dug, controlled excavations there to really get an idea of the depth and the, a lot more detail about the archaeology there. So we did that. And here are, this map's about 6 years old. I forgot to update it. So there are probably a few more, but these are all Dismal River archaeological sites or sites that have Dismal River archaeology at them. A lot of them have more than one archaeological component. But you can see the eastern 2/3 of the state, quite a few. These ones that are labeled are some of the more larger and more well-known sites. White Cat Village is down there at Harlan County Reservoir, but big. Obviously, it's a bigger village. Humphrey site is up by Mullen. Again, a pretty large site that's been excavated partially, and so spread across the eastern 2/3 of Nebraska. And so now, one problem in archaeology is that there are lumpers and there are splitters. Now, I am a lumper to a fault, right? I am a lumper. But whoever did the work at Courthouse Rock originally was a splitter, and I don't like it. So, so when they were out there, people were out there in 1977, archaeologists from our work, and they found artifacts in all these blue areas, and they called them areas with a number, and then they also gave it this archaeological site boundary, right? And that's important in our world because, we record archaeological sites, and that gets recorded, and archaeologists from our work and other places see that and sort of know what to look for. Now, these areas, they weren't mapped, they weren't on our database, and you would have had to really dig into the paperwork to figure out that, not only is there stuff right there, there's all this other stuff, right? And so, that's not a great way to go about recording artifacts. And then in 2007, some folks from Augustana University did a survey out there, and they found some more stuff. And they gave it site numbers, right? So that's good. But they're still all kind of right next to each other, but not quite together. Again, they're splitters. I'm not a splitter. And so one of the things that we did is that we decided, and when I say we, I mean me, I decided, that I was going to make this site, this 201, which was already the Dismal River site, I just made it a lot bigger to encompass sort of all that stuff people found. And then we made a new site right here to kind of encompass these 4 areas. And then we just left, because they were already sites, these other green ones, we just left those in place. And so this way, you got these 2 big sites that kind of encompass a bunch of these other places people had found artifacts. And so that allows us to have a little better control of where we know stuff might be. Even if there's spaces in between that there's not going to be artifacts, it's still important to have that bigger picture, at least in my opinion. And so after 2019, that was a big part of it, was just trying to clean up the archaeological record, for the next people who want to do work out there. And so here is a map of the subsurface, right? I mean, the digging, the holes we have dug at work to test this archaeological site. We dug 14 1-meter squares, this little yellow block right here. The blue ones are some shovel tests we dug just last year. And then the green ones are some more 1-meter squares that we excavated. These red ones are some surface finds we picked up. And it's interesting to me that there is there are arrow points and pottery sherds way up right at the base of the rock. I don't know what you're doing up there, why you're hauling your pot right up here to do something. I'm not sure. But that's where we found stuff. And so that's kind of what it looks like. And again, most of what we're finding is this Dismal River material. Now, these folks are bison hunters. They do grow corn, beans, and squash, but they're far enough west that they're probably relying much more on hunting than, the Pawnee or Ponca or Omaha, who live farther to the east where there's more rain and agriculture works better. This Dismal River people are probably hunters first and, gardeners second. And some of the artifacts from the Dismal River culture we'll look at right now, these are pottery sherds. They don't look like much, but they're really dark and they're very smooth. And so we know that they're Dismal River and they're not anything else. So that helps us kind of narrow down the cultural identification of the site. Here are some pieces of chipstone debris. And what's really interesting is these ones, those are obsidian flakes, right? And obsidian doesn't outcrop in Nebraska. It has to be brought in from somewhere. And now you remember when I told you that these folks, these Dismal River folks, started their migration from the Canadian subarctic, right, and started moving down this way, and eventually reach the Southwest and get really close ties with Pueblo groups. And so a lot of Dismal River sites, you find obsidian and it comes from the Southwest. But our obsidian, again, I like to take ownership, but it's everyone's archaeology. These ones, we tested 10 of about half of the obsidian we found, and it all comes from Idaho. It all comes from the same source in Idaho. And that's interesting. And then what's also interesting is that there's a lot of words on that chart. But what's important, and I want to tell you, is that a lot of the stone tools, right, all the other stone tools also come from northwest of the site. So we think that the Dismal River people who are living by Courthouse Rock, this is a pretty early representation of them in Nebraska because they still have much closer ties to the Northwest and haven't really started trading and interacting a whole lot with people in the Southwest. And the stone tools kind of back up that assumption because it's all from stuff. There's a lot of stuff from South Dakota and Wyoming, and then that obsidian that comes from Idaho. And there's no trade, there's no European manufactured goods at Courthouse Rock. A lot of Dismal River sites, later Dismal River sites from the late 16 and really in the 1700s, you start to find, metal trade axes and hoes and copper beads and stuff like that. And there's none of that at Courthouse Rock. Here's just some more tools we find. It's not a very dense archaeological site. It is very broad, and we are finding artifacts all the way down to a meter deep. My coworkers who helped us dig there aren't here today, but they'll tell you a meter by a meter by a meter hole is a lot of dirt to dig, right? That's a big hunk of dirt that we would excavate. And there's artifacts all the way down, which is pretty unusual to find sort of that recent of artifacts that deep. And so these are bifaces, right? Kind of think about like multi-tools. You kind of prep a stone, and then you can turn these into arrows or knives or scrapers or whatever else you want to use later. And here are some scrapers from that site. And Dismal River scrapers often have, this is the business end. That's the part you're scraping hides with. You're scraping meat and fat off of hides to tan it into leather. But Dismal River ones also not always, a lot of times have these little pointed butts, right? Tangs or gravers on them. And so, they might use that to decorate pottery. They might use that to maybe kind of poke through the leather they're scraping, and make a little slot so you can sew it together. And that's kind of unusual in the Nebraska archaeological record. You don't see those kind of tangs on the back of your scrapers very often. Here's a couple other tools that we found just last year. Here's a nearly complete arrow point. You can see little side notches, a lot smaller, right? A lot smaller than the Clovis and Mallory point because these are arrows and not throwing spears. This is a scraper, a big round ovoid scraper, big ovoid scraper. Here's a couple other projectile points. This one's unnotched, just a plain triangle. This one we found in 2 pieces, but they did refit back together. And again, this one's complete. So you can see the side notches and the flat base. So again, we know those are arrow points. And here's some scrapers from the Humphrey site, just again to show you that kind of unique little tang that you find on a lot of them. Now, also at the Courthouse Rock, there's a lot of bison bones. So what we think and what I think is that people are coming to Courthouse Rock and then using it as kind of a base camp to hunt for bison in the North Platte River Valley or along Pumpkin Creek. And so when we excavated, there's the numbers of bone. Again, it's not a super dense site, but a lot of the bones we did find were bison. And these are modern bison species. This is only about 400 years ago. And so here's one, a real great picture a coworker did for me. And you can see these cracks, right, radiating out from this break. And if I had a 3D model of it, you could see that this is depressed right in here. And that's because someone smashed it with a rock, probably to extract the bone marrow from it. That's the humerus of a bison. The left distal humerus even, look at that. And so those are big, long, right? Your humerus, it's a big fat bone on a bison, and there's lots of bone marrow in there. And we know people smash those kind of bones open to eat the bone marrow. And so another thing we found, this is part of a pipe. You can see these concentric lines are the little drill or little gouge marks. This is part of a stone pipe. And we would call that a ground stone tool. And we also found, firecrack rock and a part of a grinding stone and hematite, which is what people use to make red pigment to decorate paint or it is paint to decorate pots or hides or whatever needs decorating. And so this, the site at Courthouse Rock is the Dismal River site is kind of a really extensive hunting camp. It's somewhere where they're hunting and processing these animals, but they're there long enough that they're doing other things too, or they're coming back, time after time, and so you get this really deep archaeological component. So that is Dismal. Oh, one more. We also found just this year this square bead, and now I don't know how the people see that's a centimeter. I don't know how the people knew to make it an exact centimeter, but they did a good job. And yeah, you're supposed to laugh at that one. But anyway, square bead is really interesting because, I've been doing archaeology for a long time. I'm no expert by any means, but I've never seen a square bead in Nebraska. And we've been looking around, and they're certainly not very common. And so one of our coworkers is working on a poster for a conference we're going to go to here in a few weeks. And so it's pretty exciting. And it's really a unique artifact. And again, we got to find that just last year. So that's really pretty cool for us. And it's made out of shell, like mussel shell from the river or from the creek. And so we did, I told you we thought this site was pretty early for Dismal River based on the artifacts. And we did do C14 dating, carbon dating on some of those bison bones we found. And this is all science-y gobbledygook, but what you need to know is that when you do the science, there is a 95% chance that site dates from 1500 to 1650, which is the first half of the Dismal River. And there's a almost 2/3 shot that site is from 1625 to 1669. So kind of more in the middle. If I had my druthers, it would have been earlier. The dates would have been earlier than that. But still, a pretty good date, and so we can kind of say with some confidence when at least those bison were killed at the site. Now, the site's really deep, the deposit's really deep, so it's possible if we dated some other bones, you might get slightly different dates too. All right, so moving right along. What time is it? I'm talking. Oh, God. All right, we got to keep moving. So, again, what's important is that I think people are coming back to this site because they can see it, right? So we talked about the buried archaeology, but there's other archaeology. There's these guys. These guys are fun. These are petroglyphs, Native American petroglyphs. I've seen people refer to them as ghosts. but they have the mouth and 2 eyes and kind of that big bubble head, and then just shoulders. And you can tell the different. You can see in this one that it's pecked, right? Someone is kind of pecking at the rock to make that shape, and that's a lot different. There's lots of carved Oregon Trail people's names and much later names that people have carved with knives, metal knives, and they look a lot different. So we know pretty sure that these are, those are Native American petroglyphs. Now, who made them? That's a great question. I've asked some of the Native American tribal folks we work with for our regular jobs, and these are similar shaped heads, right? Similar heads. These are all from kind of the middle part of Kansas. And these are both Courthouse Rock, and these ones in Kansas are places that the Pawnee would have used as hunting grounds. And he's my friend. Anyway, Matt Reed is the Pawnee Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, and he's pretty sure the Courthouse Rock ones are Pawnee. And, until proven otherwise, that's kind of what we're going with. And so we've got petroglyphs too, which is fun. Now, I told you there was a Pawnee legend, and it's in the National Register, so I looked it up. I traced the sources back, and near as I can tell, this legend starts from a 1927 publication that, frankly, is really racist. Like, it is not great. It's a tough read, and the author is talking about talking to a Native American who he's really discredits. And anyway, basically, I talked to, again, the Pawnee Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, and the legend is about Pawnee warriors who get trapped on top of the rock and are saved by a spirit and miraculously escape. And now he thinks this all relates to that there's a real documented episode of Kiowa warriors get trapped on a mesa on the southwest by Mexican soldiers in the 1830s. And sort of like there's lovers' leaps everywhere, right? There's several in Nebraska, and there's lots of native princess burials around it, that there's these stories that get sort of just spread out from one probably actual event and are kind of co-opted in various places around the Great Plains. So I don't think this legend is true. I think it's kind of just made up. But it's in the National Register, so ultimately, we want to kind of update that National Register document, and we'll remove that because I don't think it's true. Also, Egg Jail and Courthouse Rock, obviously, they are on the Oregon Trail. They're on the Sydney to Deadwood Trail, and so people write about them in their diaries, right, in their trail diaries. Courthouse Rock, they seem to have a hard time settling on a name for a while. Some of the other names are right there. I like Citadel. I would have stuck with that, but Courthouse is the one that stuck, and Jailhouse that went along with Courthouse. Those are the ones that show up the most, and that's what we use today. And there's also the Pony Express Trail here's the rocks, right there. The Pony Express kind of ran right through here, and there's disagreement in a lot of the sources about exactly where. There's a Courthouse Rock Pony Express station that we know did exist. But where exactly that is or was, we're not 100% sure. It's probably somewhere in this green box, but we don't know because depending on what source you read, they're all a little bit different. And here is a map of the National Park Service trails, what they have mapped as their historic trails. You can see the Pony Express running. They've got it on the other side of Courthouse Rock, but still right next to it. And then kind of the main stem trails are up here by the North Platte River. What's one thing that shows up time again in the literature about these rocks is that people who are up here are like, I'm going to walk to that rock. It looks really close. And so they start walking, and it's like 5 miles, and it's too far. They give up, and they turn around. And this because a lot of these folks are from the East Coast or from much more wooded areas. They're not used to such open vistas. And also, you're much higher in elevation out there, and the air is literally clearer and thinner than what they're used to. So they're like, it's a mile away. I can make it. And they couldn't. It's too far. So they talk about starting out and then turning around. And here's another map. I think this map, this is a pretty accurate map. There's the Mud Springs Pony Express Station. And so there'll be another one right in here. And then there's the Sydney to Deadwood Trail and the Camp Clark Bridge, which is where the town of Bridgeport, I think, gets its name. So again, you've got these trails, historic trails, also running by these very recognizable features, right? And so if we look at air photos, I think these are trail ruts running right through here. And again, that lines up pretty well with the Sydney to Deadwood Trail, right? Running pretty much north-south. And so there's the Pumpkin Creek. This is the valley of Pumpkin Creek, and then it would come up this is a pretty gentle slope, right? Come up here and then head north. And this is a modern air photo. Here's that same shot on LiDAR. You can see, I think these are trail ruts. Now, it's hard to tell for sure because there's also people are ranching cattle out there and driving four-wheelers and stuff through there. And two-track ruts and cattle ruts can look a lot like trail ruts. But I think these are the trail ruts that the people in the National Register nomination are talking about. And here is that same picture. Through the power of the internet, we can look at this air photo from 1939. And again, you can see pretty much the same spot. The ruts running up that way. Here's what it looks like in 54. And some of these, you can see where they stitched the photos together, the individual photo shots to make a mosaic. So it's a little choppy, but again, right there is what we're looking at coming up from the valley and running up this way. And so, that's just one more wrinkle in, the history of Courthouse and Jail Rock is that the folks are traveling right by, right? And there's still evidence of that. I haven't ever seen that in person. A lot of that is on private land, but, someday hopefully we can go check that too. And here's just a shot of the Camp Clark Bridge, which is where those ruts are heading, that cross the North Platte River. And here is a picture of some Oregon Trail related names. You can see the names, and you can see those are carved. They're very much sharper, and we can tell they're not pecked like those Native American names, right? So we can tell the difference. When we were out there, this is from 1933. There's also much later names. I think we saw ones into the 1950s. And so it's, and there's also broken beer bottles all over. So it's still a place, it's still drawing people to this day. It's still drawing people to that spot, right? It still has this attraction to humans to do things there. And I think it's just because it's such recognizable on the landscape that it brings people back and has for 12,000 years. And some things like to do in the future, it's time and money willing, it'd be cool to do there's some advanced photographic techniques that archaeologists use. It'd be really neat to do the whole rock with those and really pick apart the inscriptions and see what we could identify that way. I am not a soil expert, and I'm not 100% sure why the artifacts we find are so deep. We could bring in a geomorphologist, which is someone who studies soils as their career, to help us understand that aspect of the site. That would be really cool. I'd love to do more testing to see if we can find more artifacts from the Clovis and Mallory times, those really older times, because right now we're stuck at one each. And they're definitive, but it's still just one. And so, the potential for more work is really great. And the state and the Historical Society owns it. So, it's protected and it'll be there for us to do some of this work, hopefully in the future. And here is another picture I took. This is another good one. I got both rocks, right? There's Courthouse Rock and there's Jailhouse Rock. And it's really pretty out there. If you're ever out there, you can drive up and walk around and have a look. It's really scenic. As long as you face this way, it looks exactly like it was gonna for time immemorial. There's a McMansion if you turn around, but you just don't look that way, and everything is cool. So, all right, questions?
Noel, the artifacts you're talking about, Dismal, what relation is to that, to the Dismal River that runs to the Sandhills?
So some of the very earliest Dismal River sites were found, oddly enough, right next to the Dismal River. Guy named William Duncan Strong found some Dismal River sites long ago in Nebraska, and so that name is just stuck. So good question.
I'm Dave Colvine. After seeing this, I'm pretty sure that I do have one of the small points that I found as a kid in the gravel on the road that went past my farm. A place where Mom didn't mind if I didn't show up for hours because I was having fun. I'd like to bring it in sometime and see if it can be. It is not fluted. Like I say, it is not notched.
Yeah, I agree.
Small.
I'll give you my business card when we're done, and you can come to our office and we'll check. We can identify it for sure.
How do you pick the 1 square meter areas you're going to excavate?
Well, good question. So, the first ones we did in 2019, my coworker Mac, we sent him out there and we said, find us a flat spot where we can fit 20 people that has some artifacts on the surface. And that was it, because it's very rugged, right? And the people we have volunteer look a lot like you, sir. Kind of an older group, you know? And so we wanted a nice spot for them to work. Now, where we found that Clovis point, those we were digging because there's talk of putting some lights in Courthouse Rock. If you've ever seen Chimney Rock, they light it up at night, and it's pretty cool. And so there's some discussion doing the same at Courthouse Rock. So our job is to make sure that improvement doesn't negatively impact the archaeological record at the site. So they told us where they wanted to do that, and that's exactly where we dug our holes, kind of the more recent ones last year. So, thank you.
I want to know more about square bead.
You know, me too. So square bead is made out of almost certainly a mussel shell that could have come from Pumpkin Creek or the North Platte River. There are other archaeological sites where you find shells that people are eating and shells that people are modifying to make like spoons and other decorative items, little fish lures, which are fun. And there are places in Nebraska where you can find hundreds or thousands of round beads made out of shells in the same place. So shell beads are pretty common in the state archaeological record. Square ones, we haven't come across any square ones. You find rectangular pendants, like what you might wear as a necklace. But those usually have the hole really more to one end, to dangle it. That square one, it's right in the middle. It really looks like you're going to have a bunch of them and string them together. Think about little kids making beadwork. But yeah, I know Elsie is looking at some stuff from the Southwest where you do find some square ones and some other farther afield archaeological references to try to find anywhere where there's square beads that we can kind of compare to. So, yeah. Anyone else? All right. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, Nolan. And thank you all again for joining us for this month's Lunchbox lecture. I would like to invite you to join us next month. Our next Lunchbox lecture is Tuesday, October 21st at noon here in the Old Father Auditorium. We will have members of the Pershing Mural Historical Preservation Committee and the artists behind our new tactile history exhibit right outside the auditorium. They will be speaking about the Pershing Auditorium, the Pershing mural, and the preservation project around that. So we encourage you guys to come back next month. Thank you so much. Have a great day.